Hey guys, welcome back. So today, we're working on this Craftsman LT1000. It is powered by a Kohler Pro 17-horse engine and actually comes to us from a neighbor. He said he was using it last year, early in the season, when he accidentally hit a rock. That was followed by a bunch of noise and smoke coming from the engine area, so he shut it down and pretty much assumed that he had blown the engine. So he replaced the machine. This has sat unused for the last year. And well, fast forward to this year, and he was kind of wondering what to do with it. So I offered to take a look at it, assuming that potentially we could fix it. So the goal today is going to be to get this machine up and running again, see exactly what it's doing, and hopefully fix the problem. So let me get you set up a little bit better. We'll get this tractor off the trailer into the garage and see if we can't figure out what exactly went wrong with this machine. Actually, change of plan. Let's just pressure wash this real quick. There is definitely a layer of dirt and dust all over the machine, but the condition's actually really good. I don't see much in the way of rust. Even the engine looks decent, aside from a bit of oil and what looks like a critter nest, so we're going to have to clean that out. The deck also in very good shape. It's a heavy-duty 12-gauge deck. Don't see any rot holes, but then again, there is some leaves and grass covering things up. So yeah, let's just clean this off real quick, and then we'll start working on it. All right, let's see if this thing starts up. It's been, well, since last season. So ignition's on, choke's on, fuel's on. And this also has that cheap Amazon pump we put on, say about 3 years ago. So hopefully that still works. So yeah, overall the deck is in pretty good shape. Yeah, I don't really see a whole lot wrong with it. Whether those spindles or pulleys are good, that's to be determined. But there is one kind of crack and dent coming out right here. So, I would say at some point a rock likely got thrown up in there and caused a bit of damage, but it's not really structural. I don't think we have to worry about that yet. The tractor also cleaned up well. Still needs more work, but yeah, let's get it running first. So let's start actually by getting the hood out of the way. The wire harness for the lights was actually already unplugged, so we should, on a lot of models, just be able to lift the hood off like that. So first things first, let's check the basics and make sure we have oil. If the cap will come off. There we go. And yeah, we have oil. It actually seems to be filled to the correct level. And the oil doesn't smell contaminated with fuel, so we are off to a good start. And let's check the air filter, make sure that is clean. We know we likely have a mouse nest in the blower housing, so we're going to take that off in a minute. But I want to make sure the air filter doesn't have issues as well. And yeah, we've got some grass, but it was doing its job, so we'll clean that out as well. But the filter itself actually looks to be pretty good. Yeah, initially, I thought the tank was empty, but then I pulled the cap and saw what was inside. We do have some old fuel. I'd say it's been in there for a couple years, so I'm sure the fuel system needs to be gone through. Most likely the carburetor as well, but I guess one good sign is that the fuel valve is in the off position. So let's get the blower housing off. We've got some 10 millimeter bolts going around, maybe mixed in with some 8s. And it looks like we might have a bridge rectifier right here connected with some wires. So yeah, let's just pull the bolts. We'll leave the wires connected to the rectifier. And it looks like one more bolt there. And same on the other side. Yeah, I think there's one more bolt right here. Let me just pull that out. And theoretically, we should be free. Yep. Wow. That is pretty bad. Yeah, this is pretty bad. So hopefully this happened after the incident and the engine wasn't actually run like this, because air-cooled engines, they need air to cool. That is the whole purpose of the fan on the top here. It pulls air in through the top. The shroud directs the air over the head and through the cooling fin. So if the engine was actually run like this, it would overheat and cause engine damage. So before we go any further, let's clean out this mess and then we can move on. And it clogged up the vacuum. And it might still need a little bit of work, but you can see pretty big difference. You know, now the air can cool that head properly. So I'm thinking, we should probably check for spark. This coil looks a little bit questionable, and we'll also check the compression, but I can tell just from spinning it by hand, we definitely have compression, and the fact that the flywheel springs back during the compression stroke also is a good sign. It means we don't have much in the way of leak down. So let's get a battery in it, we'll crank the engine, see if we have spark and compression. Terminal looks pretty clean. I think we can get away with that. And before we crank the engine over, I'm going to turn the throttle all the way down just in case it starts, and we're going to check the governor linkage as well, make sure it's not stuck in wide open throttle. And no, seems to work fine. So if it does happen to start, we shouldn't have a runaway engine. So let's try cranking it. Very nice. And to check for spark, we're just going to use this inline tester. Doesn't necessarily tell you how strong the spark is, but it will light up if we have any spark. So let me get you a little better situated. We'll kill the lights and see if this thing lights up. All right, so I'm going to kill the lights. Keep an eye on the tester. Yeah, we've got nice, strong spark. So I don't think we're going to have an issue with spark. So let's get the plug out, see where the compression's at. Plug actually looks pretty decent. It's a Champion RC 12YC. We'll replace this anyway, but let's get the compression tester in there and get a baseline where we're at. All right, let's see where this one comes in at. Now, this engine, it does have a decompression system, so likely we're not going to see much above 60, but hopefully we see at least that much. And yeah, not too bad. We're actually at about 110 PSI, so that definitely should be enough to get the engine running. Well, so far, things are checking out. We have spark and compression. So to get this engine to run, we need spark, compression, timing, and fuel. You know, fuel, I'm sure, is going to be an issue. Timing could also be, given that this hit a rock. So to check it, there is a key under the flywheel, which we could pull the flywheel off and double check. But there is an easier way. If you rotate the engine clockwise until the magnet just clears the coil, in that position, the piston should be at the top of its travel. So let's double check. And if that's the case, then likely the flywheel key is fine. So what you want to do is get a screwdriver and carefully put it in the spark plug hole until that screwdriver tip is on top of the piston. And in this position, the piston should be at the highest point in its travel. So if we rotate the flywheel clockwise, we should see this drop in, which it does. And if we go backwards to what should be top dead center, we're back extended out like we were. And if we keep going backwards, we should see that screwdriver sink in again. And we do. So the piston, it's where it should be in relation to the flywheel. So timing, don't think it's an issue. And even though the old plug looks good, we're gonna swap it out for a new Champion RC12YC. I already double checked the gap and it is perfect. So we'll get that started by hand and then run it down. So I'm thinking at a minimum, we should at least drain the tank and probably clean the carb. You know, the fuel doesn't look great. And I'm sure when it was shut down after hitting the rock, you know, the carb wasn't run dry. And carbs usually end up being a problem. So yeah, if we clean it, probably won't need it, but I'm thinking we should clean it anyway to just know for sure that the fuel system is good to go before trying for the first start. And yeah, not much in there, but actually, I think it's mostly water. You know, if you look near the top, you can see a very thin line. I think that is the fuel, and everything below it is nasty old water. So yeah, likely the carb has water in it as well, and hopefully hasn't rusted it out. So I think we have no choice but to go in and get that cleaned up. Just got the breather connected here to the airbox. We gotta remove that either from the engine side or the box side, but I think the engine side might be the easier way. Yeah, and there's no gasket here between the airbox and the carburetor, so not great. So we'll have to try to add one when we put this back together. That is the fuel solenoid. Fuel line's already disconnected. Got to break the seal between the carb and the engine and get the linkages off. Then we should be free. All right, I think we're free. We need to release the throttle. And I think there's just a clip here we can undo to at least free that linkage up. And the choke, I think we actually need to pull the carb off and kind of tilt it to get that linkage off. Wire looks like the fuel solenoid right here. So now we should be able to pull this off. So I don't hear any fuel on the carb, and I actually do hear the float moving around, so that's a good sign. Fuel solenoid actually wasn't super tight, and it's spinning out pretty easily, so yeah, not stuck. So this carb may actually not need a whole lot. Although I think it has been some time since it's been opened. Yeah, actually not bad. Bowl is fairly clean. We have a little bit of rust or maybe varnish right there. Float is not stuck. Although the pin was giving me a little resistance. Needle looks good. And that appears to be it. This emulsion tube, it's not slotted, so I don't think we can remove it. Potentially that might have been holding it in place. So we might be able to actually push it out. So we'll just apply a bit of pressure. I don't want to cause any damage if it's actually pressed in. And no, it's not coming out. So yeah, very, very simple carburetor. There's really nothing else we can remove. This is a fine adjustment on the pilot circuit, but it does have a limiter on it, so we can't actually twist that out. So yeah, the carb I think would have run. But since we have it off, let's soak it real quick in the ultrasonic. We'll get it back on, try it out. So it cleaned up pretty well. You know, although the inside was pretty good, the outside was filthy and the bowl had some varnish in it, but that is all gone. So it should run. So there's not much to this carb to put back together other than the needle, the float, and the pin. As well as the bowl and the fuel solenoid. Which I did not run through the ultrasonic. Okay, let's bolt it back on and try it out. We're going to reuse the gasket. It came off pretty clean. And this is not a bolt you have to torque, but you do want it snug, and you don't want to overdo it. It's a small bolt into aluminum. We'll get this solenoid plugged in as well. And I did come up with a couple gasket options here. Not sure what these gaskets were meant for, but they seem to fit pretty well. That one's not too bad, although it is just barely rubbing the top of that choke plate a little. And then we have this other one, which I did have to elongate the hole just a bit on the right to get it to fit on these studs. And like the last one, it's a pretty good fit, although I don't sense any drag at all between that gasket and the plate, so I think that's our winner. And I'm going to replace this as well. You know, the lines aren't too bad, but it's also a paper filter, which on a gravity-fed system you really don't want to use. You know, as soon as a paper filter starts to clog up, the gravity just doesn't have enough pressure to push through it. And a filter like this is just a screen. It's not as fine, but it is what's required on a gravity-fed system. And lastly, we have the air box. This was also pretty caked up, so I ran that through the ultrasonic. And now it is nice and clean. So we'll just get one of the bolts started, reconnect the breather, and then torque everything down. All right, so we're gonna do a quick test. We can't run it too long because we don't have the cooling shroud on, but we can run it for a few minutes, at least long enough to see that the engine runs and runs properly. But based on the testing we've done, I think it will. You know, it turns over nice, we have compression, we have spark, we have timing, and we have fuel. So let's give it some choke and try it out. No issues at all with the engine. It started right up, sounds really good, had no issues at all, idling down and revving up. And I did not see any smoke. So I don't think we have an engine issue, and likely we never did. You know, the problem might be with the deck. So we'll take a look at that in a minute. But before we do that, I did discover another issue, which I wasn't really expecting. The transmission, not working. I could not shift into any forward or reverse gear. The shifter is just stuck right where it is. So let's try to free that up. And once we sort that issue out, we can turn our attention to the deck. So I didn't spend a whole lot of time trying to get this to move while the engine was running. We had the clock ticking, and I didn't want to overheat the engine, but it moves right to left, no issue. But that is it. So yeah, let's see if we can get a look at that linkage and figure out what is going on. I think the best way to get a look at the linkage is to pull the battery out. This whole tray actually lifts out, so we got to get these leads off first. It's still kind of hard to see kind of clearly what's going on here, but the best I can tell, this lever connects down to what I can best describe as a type of jack shaft that runs across, and then we have this piece of metal right here which runs over to this linkage and ultimately into the transmission. So I'm not sure exactly where it's locked up, so I'm just going to spray everything down. We'll keep working the lever until hopefully this breaks free. So let's try the shift lever again. Oh, it's moving. Not good, but it's getting better. So I'm not sure what part exactly was locked up, but I think now that it's moving, just using it is going to free it up the rest of the way. So I'm going to spray a little bit more oil on it. We'll start it back up again and just make sure that the transmission actually works. Okay, let's get the battery back in, try it out. All right, let's try this again. Battery is reinstalled. And the transmission seems to shift, so let's start it in neutral. Very nice. So it would appear that this is a viable machine. The transmission is now working. We have both forward and reverse gears. Engine continues to run well. And for the most part, I would say everything critical that needs to work is working on this machine. That said, though, there are still a few things we need to deal with, mostly just minor maintenance things like changing the oil, potentially a new air filter, and this rear wheel actually isn't holding air, so likely we need to add a tube to that. But those are just common maintenance things. I'm not too worried about that. So for now, I'm thinking let's get the blower housing back on. I do want to restart it, make sure that the voltage regulator is actually charging the battery. And if that checks out, then we'll shift our focus to the mower deck. And this regulator also cools from the same fan. So another reason this shroud should be kept on is so that you don't burn this out. It's probably safe to get the hood back on, so we'll do that. And I'm going to plug in the wire harness, see if the headlights work. So this is the harness from the tractor. That's the one coming down from the headlights. And they're plugged in. So let's try them out. All right, so one click should turn the headlights on. So let's take a look. And yeah, we got lights. Both of them seem to work just fine. The battery, we're sitting at about 12.63 volts and dropping due to the load that the lights are putting on. So let's choke the engine and get it started. We do also have an amp gauge right here, but it is pegged out. So definitely that is not working. All right, battery's charging. So yeah, no issues with the charging system or the lights. So let's take this thing for a little drive around the yard. I want to get some heat into the engine. We've only run this for a few seconds at a time. I want to make sure everything is 100%, and then we'll turn our attention to the deck. And we're going to have to make this quick. I just inflated this tire and sprayed some soapy water, and there's actually a pretty big crack on the sidewall here that is the cause of the leak. So yeah, for sure, it needs a new tube, potentially new tires altogether. Tractor actually drove quite well, so no complaints there. Aside from some of the maintenance items we spoke about, I think this is pretty much good to go. So that just leaves the deck. And there's not a whole lot that can go wrong on this. We have a belt that is spinning these two pulleys and the spindles. So, if we check these out, the spindle spins fine, although a bit noisy. That would not cause a major issue. The bearing still seems to be tight, so there is still some life left in that spindle. This pulley moves, but only to a point. We actually don't get a whole lot of rotation on that, so likely the bearing has failed unless I'm missing a brake or something on the spindle, or the pulley rather, but that is definitely an issue. This one spins just fine, so no issues there. Again, the bearing is questionable, but there's no excessive play, so likely that is not going to cause an issue, at least in the short term. And this spindle also spins. Ooh. Well, that's your issue. So something is making contact with that blade. And like that spindle can't spin. And if the deck was engaged, which it was when it hit a rock, that would have locked things up and likely smoked the belt. So that was likely the smoke that was misinterpreted as engine damage. And obviously it would have been making a lot of noise as well. So I think we found our issue here. So we'll start with this one since we have easy access to it. Likely this failed over the last year while this was sitting outside. Water got in there, likely rusted up the balls on the ball bearing. But we might be able to break it free so we can at least test it. But I'd say this for sure needs to be replaced. And we are making it around, but it's not spinning well and pretty crunchy. Just gonna give this a little bit more lube. And it is coming around, so although far from new, I'd say far from good, but it's also not trash either. He could probably run with this for a while. Ultimately, I don't know what he wants to do with this machine, but if he plans to keep it long term, I would say for sure 2 new pulleys and potentially spindles, depending upon what we find with that other one. So let's flip the deck over and see what we see here. Oh yeah, I see the problem already. So can you see it? Right there. Blade's making contact. So this part of the deck, I guess, took the brunt of the rock hit and tore that piece of metal, and now it's sticking in such a way that it's making contact with the blade. The blade also might be bent, although it's kind of hard to tell, if we can't make a full revolution here. So let's beat that back into submission and we'll check the blade. Likely that is bad. But if we get that out of the way, that should at least allow it to rotate. Interesting. So the blade's actually hitting the deck too. So is the deck deformed or is the blade? Blade does not hit on that side. So let's just put my finger on the highest point on the blade. We'll rotate it around. We'll check the other side. And yeah, the blade is pretty severely bent. So I think if we get a new blade, it won't contact this spot anymore. So let's check the other blade, see if that one's bent as well. And we'll do the same thing for the other blade here. So the top of the blade is almost at the same level as the bottom of the deck. It's right about there. And if we rotate this around to the other side, not as bad, but it's definitely bent and not at the same height. So yeah, we're going to need, for sure, a set of blades. So I'm going to try to flatten this a little more. We're still sticking up a little right there. And technically this piece should go back in, although when feeling the bottom, I'm not convinced it will. Potentially we need to hit it that way a little bit. But if we can get it down a little more, we can run a little tack in this area just to strengthen it a bit. And we might do the same with that crack we found on the other end. And honestly, I don't know if we need to really get it back perfect. As it is right there, we could probably just tack it and be good. And yeah, I think I'm going to call that good, because the more I'm beating this, the more we're weakening it right here. It's actually broken a little bit right there, so we might have to tack it a bit there, a little bit along here to give it some strength back. And I think that'll do it as far as that repair goes. And the other one right here looks quite a bit worse with the light shining through it. So a few tacks there would be, I think, a good thing. Let's try to flatten this out a little bit. And there is still enough metal there. I don't think we need to actually run a mending plate, but it is thin in spots, so if it starts burning through with the welder, then we're going to have no choice but to put a plate there. Yeah, let's get the paint off, and we'll probably do this weld inside, out of the wind. Yeah, I think that's going to be fine. The blade still hits, obviously, because the blade is bent, so I'm not too worried about that. I think that'll be fine once we replace the blade. And I'm tempted to sand this down, but to be honest, I'd rather have the extra strength there than make it look pretty in a location where no one's going to see it anyway. So I'm going to call that one good. And let's move on to the crack and get that patched up. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to fix that. It is blowing through right there. So I'm going to continue at least with what I can, and we are going to have to put, I think, a little patch right there. Yeah, unfortunately, it's a pretty tight spot, and I'm having trouble kind of clearing this area, and that's where we're going to need to install the patch. I'm just going to use a little piece of metal, although that's not a very good fit either because this is round. And bent. So, not sure if this is going to work, but I'm trying a washer kind of as a backing plate. We'll get it tacked in place, then we can remove the clamp and see if we can fill it in. Kind of working. I think I'm going to call that for the win. Not pretty, but it's better than a crack pretty much the entire height of the deck. So the grinder really can't get in that corner too well. But we'll grind it the best we can, get some fresh paint over this weld. Try to get a little primer on here, but the can, pretty empty. But we don't need much. Actually, let's make sure the blades come off cleanly before ordering up some new ones, because potentially that might force us to replace the spindles. No problem at all. And how about the other side? Yeah. No issues at all. Well, it's a few days later, and we've got parts. A new set of blades, a new belt, a new oil filter, and a tube to repair the leaking tire. So let's start there. So there is a very good chance that this rim is actually rusted onto the shaft. And even before we can find out, we need to get this dust boot off, which is kind of petrified, so I might need to warm it up a bit and try it again. Yeah, I think we're on the right track. It's loosening up. And just an E-clip holding the rim on. And in theory, we should be free. And look at that. It's not rusted on. Very nice. Yeah, actually, this might work. So we'll just get the valve stem out so that way we don't have any pressure fighting us when trying to break the bead. I think we're going to be okay. This was kind of the part I was most worried about, because if it's too high, you don't have the proper leverage. And even as it is right now, I think we do have to make an adjustment, but I think this will work. Assuming the vise is up to the task. There we go. So we got the bead broken on this side. Got to flip it over, do the same on the other. Okay, and we're broken on this side as well. So I will flip it one more time. We need to get the tire kind of over the rim just on one side, and that will allow us to pull the tire most of the way from the rim, giving us space to work that tube in there. And there is a separate tool with this changer to help, pull the tire over the rim, but I find that tool is actually harder to use in most cases than a set of spoons. So we're going to start there. And this tire is pretty stiff and petrified as well, so going to be a bit of a challenge, but I think we'll be okay. Getting there. And that right there is what we're looking for. So the inside of the tire looks pretty good. No one's slimed it in the past. Looks fairly clean. So we need to pull out this valve, fish in the tube, and carefully get this back on without pinching that tube. What? I'm not sure. Okay. I got tubes in here between the tire and the tube ends and plates. I think we're good. Take this back on. And we're just going to put some anti-seize on here so that next time this wheel needs to come off, hopefully it'll come off as easy as it did this time. And I'm going to do the same to the other side if it's not already stuck. Looks like this one is still free. And the belt, probably should have double checked it to make sure it was the right size, but it seems to be going on pretty snug. And then we just got these two links to connect up to the front. And finally the cable to actually engage the deck. And last but not least, we've got the cable that engages the blades. So we first need to hook it on this bracket like that, and the other end of the spring connects kind of deep in there. Huh. And I can see it. I don't think you can, but it's way in there. So maybe that should have been connected a little bit sooner. So the deck right now, it is fully down, so that's going to give us the most amount of space. But I think to have any chance of connecting this, I have to come over to your side. And I'm not sure how well you can see this, but that's the connection point right there for the cable. So we need to remove this pin. And put the spring on that post like that. And it kind of seems like we should have another washer on the top, but I don't think there was one. And that pin's kind of loose. Let me see if I can get maybe a smaller one. Yeah, that's better. And that should do it. I guess my only question is there a return spring? Because if I turn the deck on like that, seems to work. And we take the tension off. And yeah, the tension does come off. Although I would expect maybe something to pull that idler. So I don't know if we're missing a spring or if this is the way that it should be. Although we do have something there, although it looks like it's just a stop. So yeah, maybe we aren't missing anything, but I'm not sure of that. So we're going to run it as it is and see if the blades will disengage. And one more piece of the puzzle, we have to secure this cable. So this plastic is just like a spacer. And then we have a clip to hold it in place like that. All right, so the deck is up, blades are not engaged. I'm going to start the engine, and once the engine stabilizes, we'll try engaging the blades. Nice. Well, considering this machine was left for dead about a year ago, I think we're doing pretty good. It starts consistently without issue, idles real good, revs up without issue, drive system's functional, and now the deck seems to be functional. It actually sounded good. no issues engaging the blades. And I was a little concerned about the spindle brakes, but those are working as well, because when I disengaged the blades, the deck spun down within a second or two like it should. So at this point, I think we're ready to try it out, maybe with the exception of the oil. So let's change that real quick, and then we'll get it outside and put it to work. This engine takes a surprising amount of oil, just over 2 liters, with a filter change. So it's not quite done draining. I think we can crack this filter free. Maybe. There we go. And we're making a mess. It'd be nice if they had this filter the other way. As it is, you can't really pre-fill this one. Although you can get the filter wet with oil, but any more than that, and you're just going to make a pretty big mess like that, trying to put it on. Yeah, that is perfect. Right at the full mark. And the oil that came out, besides being well used, actually looks to be in excellent condition. There is no glitter in there, no gray tint from metal in the oil. It looks to be perfect. So no concerns with the engine. So we're just going to give this a little exercise here on this patch of grass. It is still fairly early in the season. The grass has greened up and it is starting to grow. So it should be a pretty good test. All right, guys, and that is pretty much a wrap. This machine just performs flawlessly. It had no issues at all cutting the lawn. And for a 20-year-old machine that was left for dead a year ago, I'd say we're doing pretty well. And the owner is going to be pretty happy. I know this one he prefers over his replacement tractor, and now he's got it back. So, I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.